Herr Korbes, A Fairy Tale by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, a little hen and a little cock decided to go on a journey together. The cock built a beautiful carriage with 4 red wheels and harnessed 4 little mice to pull it. The hen and the cock climbed onto the carriage and set off together. Not long into their journey, they met a cat who asked, "Where are you going?" The cock replied, "We are off and away to the house of Herr Korbes today." "Take me with you," said the cat. The cock answered, "Certainly, hop on behind so you don't fall off in front. But take care not to dirty my little red wheels. Wheels, roll on, mice, pipe your song, for we are off and away to the house of Herr Korbes today." Soon after, they met a millstone, then an egg, then a duck, then a pin, and finally a needle. Each of them asked to join the journey, and the cock agreed. They all climbed onto the carriage and continued their way to Herr Korbes's house. When they arrived at Herr Korbes's house, he was not home. The mice drove the carriage into the barn. The hen flew with the cock onto a perch. The cat sat by the hearth. The duck perched on the well pole. The egg rolled itself into a towel. The pin stuck itself into the chair cushion. The needle jumped onto the bed and hid in the middle of the pillow. And the millstone lay over the door. Soon after, Herr Korbes came home. He went to the hearth to start a fire, but the cat threw a handful of ashes into his face. He hurried to the kitchen to wash himself, but the duck splashed water all over him. He reached for a towel to dry off, but the egg rolled up to him, broke, and glued his eyes shut. He wanted to rest, so he sat down in the chair, but the pin pricked him. Frustrated and angry, he threw himself onto the bed, but as soon as he laid his head on the pillow, the needle pricked him so sharply that he screamed and rushed towards the door to flee into the world. But as he came to the door, the millstone fell and struck him down. Herr Korbes must have been a very wicked man. The Godfather, A Fairy Tale by the Brothers Grimm. A poor man had so many children that he had already asked nearly everyone in the world to be a godfather. When another child was born, there was no one left to ask. He didn't know what to do, so he lay down in his distress and fell asleep. In his dream, he was told to go to the city gate and ask the first person he met to be the godfather. When he woke up, he decided to follow the dream's advice. He went to the gate, and the first person he met there, he asked to be the godfather. The stranger gave him a small glass of water and said, "This is a miraculous water. With it, you can heal the sick. You just need to see where death is standing. If death stands by the patient's head, give the patient some of this water, and they will recover. But if death stands by their feet, all efforts will be in vain, for the patient must die." From that point on, the man could always tell if a patient could be saved or not. He became famous for his skill and earned a lot of money. One day, he was called to the child of the king. When he entered, he saw Death standing by the child's head and cured the child with the water. The same happened the second time. But the third time, Death stood by the child's feet, and the man knew the child could not be saved. The man decided to visit his godfather and tell him how well the water had worked. But when he arrived at the house, he encountered a series of strange happenings. On the first flight of stairs, a broom and a shovel were quarreling and striking each other fiercely. He asked them, "Where does the godfather live?" The broom replied, "1 flight of stairs higher." When he reached the second flight, he saw a pile of dead fingers lying around. He asked, "Where does the godfather live?" One of the fingers answered, "1 flight of stairs higher." On the third flight, he saw a heap of dead heads, which directed him, "1 flight of stairs higher." On the fourth flight, he saw fishes over the fire, sizzling in the pans and cooking themselves. They also said, "1 flight of stairs higher." When he finally reached the fifth flight, he came to a room and peeked through the keyhole. There, he saw the godfather with a pair of long horns. As soon as the godfather noticed him, he quickly got into bed and covered himself up. The man entered and said, "Dear godfather, what a peculiar household you have. On your first flight of stairs, the broom and shovel were quarreling and beating each other violently." "How silly you are," replied the godfather. "That was just the servant and the maid talking to each other. But on the second flight, I saw a pile of dead fingers." "Oh, how foolish you are. Those were just roots of scorzonera." On the third flight, there was a heap of dead heads. "Nonsense, those were just cabbages." On the fourth flight, I saw fishes in a pan, sizzling and cooking themselves. As he said this, the fishes jumped up and served themselves on plates. And when I reached the fifth flight, I peeped through the keyhole, and there, godfather, I saw you with long, long horns. Oh, that is not true, replied the godfather. The man became frightened and ran out of the house, and who knows what might have happened to him if he had stayed longer in that strange place. Frau Trude, a Fairy Tale by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who was stubborn and curious. Whenever her parents told her something, she would not obey them. How could things possibly go well for her? One day, she said to her parents, I have heard so much about Frau Trude. I want to go visit her. People say her house looks so strange, and they tell tales of such odd things inside that I have become very curious. Her parents strictly forbade her and said, Frau Trude is a wicked woman who practices godless things. If you go to her, you are no longer our child. But the girl paid no attention to her parents' prohibition and went to Frau Trude anyway. When she arrived, Frau Trude asked her, Why are you so pale? Oh, she replied, trembling all over, I was so frightened by what I saw. What did you see? I saw a black man on your steps. That was a coal miner. Then I saw a green man. That was a huntsman. After that, I saw a blood-red man. That was a butcher. Oh, Frau Trude, I was terrified. I looked through the window and didn't see you, but I saw the devil himself with a head of fire. Oh, she said. So you saw the witch in her true costume? I have been waiting for you and longing for you for a long time. You shall give me light. With that, she transformed the girl into a block of wood and threw her into the fire. When it blazed brightly, Frau Trude sat beside it, warming herself, and said, That shines brightly for once. This tale serves as a cautionary reminder about disobedience and the dangers of curiosity, particularly when venturing into unknown and possibly malevolent territories. Godfather Death, a Fairy Tale by the Brothers Grimm. A poor man had 12 children and had to work day and night just to give them bread. When the 13th came into the world, he did not know how to help himself in his need, so he ran out onto the highway and intended to ask the first person he met to be the godfather. The first person who met him was the dear God, who already knew what was on his heart, and said to him, Poor man, I pity you. I will stand as godfather at your child's baptism, care for it, and make it happy on earth. Who are you? Asked the man. I am the dear God. Then I do not desire you as godfather, said the man. You give to the rich and let the poor go hungry. Thus spoke the man because he did not know how wisely God distributes wealth and poverty. So he turned away from the Lord and continued on his way. Then the devil approached him and said, What are you looking for? If you take me as your child's godfather, I will give him riches in abundance and all the pleasures of the world besides. Who are you? Asked the man. I am the devil. Then I do not desire you as godfather, said the man. You deceive and lead people astray. He continued on, and then Death came walking toward him on his withered legs and said, Take me as your child's godfather. Who are you? Asked the man. I am Death, who makes everyone equal. Then you are the right one. You take the rich as well as the poor without distinction. You shall be my child's godfather. Death answered, I will make your child rich and famous, for he who has me as a friend cannot fail. The man said, Next Sunday is the baptism. Be there on time. Death appeared as promised and stood as godfather in good order. When the boy came of age, his godfather came to him one day and asked him to come along. He led him out into the forest, showed him an herb that grew there, and said, Now you shall receive your godfather's gift. I will make you into a famous physician. Whenever you are called to a sick person, I will appear to you. If I stand at the sick person's head, you may boldly say that you can make him well again, and if you give him some of this herb, he will recover. But if I stand at the sick person's feet, he is mine, and you must say that all help is in vain, and no physician in the world can save him. But beware of using this herb against my will, or something bad will happen to you. It did not take long for the young man to become the most famous physician in the whole world. He only needs to look at the sick, and he already knows whether they will recover or must die, they said of him, and people came from far and wide, brought him to their sick, and gave him so much gold that he soon became a wealthy man. Now it happened that the king fell ill. The physician was called and was to say if recovery were possible. But when he approached the bed, death was standing at the sick man's feet, and no herb on earth could help him any longer. If only I could deceive death once, thought the physician. He will certainly be angry, but since I am his godson, he will perhaps turn a blind eye. I will risk it. So he took hold of the sick man and laid him the other way around so that death now stood at his head. Then he gave him some of the herb, and the king recovered and became healthy again. But death came to the physician, made a dark and angry face, threatened him with his finger, and said, "You have deceived me. I will overlook it this time because you are my godson, but if you dare to do it again, it will cost you your neck, for I will take you away with me." Soon after, the king's daughter fell seriously ill. She was his only child, and he cried day and night until his eyes were going blind. He proclaimed that whoever rescued her from death would become her husband and inherit the crown. When the physician came to the sick girl's bed, he saw death at her feet. He should have remembered his godfather's warning, but he was so infatuated by the princess's great beauty and the prospect of becoming her husband that he threw all thoughts to the wind. He did not see death looking at him angrily, raising his hand into the air and threatening him with his withered fist. He lifted the sick girl and placed her head where her feet had been. Then he gave her some of the herb, and her cheeks immediately turned red, and life stirred in her once again. Death, seeing that he had been cheated out of his property for the second time, approached the physician with long strides and said, "You are finished. Now it is your turn." Then Death seized him so firmly with his ice-cold hand that he could not resist and led him into an underground cavern. There the physician saw how thousands and thousands of candles were burning in endless rows, some large, others medium-sized, others small. Every moment some died out, and others were relit, so that the little flames seemed to be jumping about in constant change. "See," said Death, "these are the life lights of mankind. The large ones belong to children, the medium-sized ones to married people in their best years, and the small ones to old people. However, even children and young people often have only a tiny candle." "Show me my life light," said the physician, thinking it would still be very large. Death pointed to a little stump that was just threatening to go out and said, "There it is." "Oh, dear godfather," said the horrified physician, "light a new one for me. Do it as a favor to me so that I can enjoy my life, become king and husband to the beautiful princess." "I cannot," answered Death. "One must go out before a new one is lit. Then set the old one onto a new one that will keep burning after the old one is finished," begged the physician. Death pretended to fulfill this wish and took hold of a large new candle. But wanting revenge, he deliberately made a mistake in relighting it, and the little piece fell down and went out. Immediately, the physician fell to the ground, and now he too was in the hands of Death. Tash Thumbeling's Travels, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. A certain tailor had a son who grew small and no bigger than a thumb. Hence he was called Thumbling. He had courage in him and said to his father, "Father, I should and must go out into the world." "Right, my son," said the old man, took a long darning needle and made a knob of sealing wax on it by the candlelight, "and here's a sword for you to take on your way." The little tailor wanted to share one more meal with them and hopped into the kitchen to see what his mother had cooked for the last time. However, it was just served, and the dish stood on the stove. Then he said, "Mother, what's for dinner today?" "See for yourself," said his mother. So Thumbling jumped onto the stove and looked into the dish, but as he stretched his neck too far in, the steam from the food caught him and carried him up the chimney. He rode on the steam in the air for a while until he finally sank back to the ground. Now the little tailor was out in the wide world, traveling about, and even worked for a master in his craft, but the food was not good enough for him. "Mistress, if you don't give us better food," said Thumbling, "I will leave, and tomorrow morning I will write on your door with chalk, 'Too many potatoes, too little meat. Farewell, Mr. Potato King.'" "What do you want, Grasshopper?" said the mistress, getting angry, grabbed a dishcloth, and was about to hit him. But my little tailor crept quickly under a thimble, peeked out from under it, and stuck his tongue out at the mistress. She picked up the thimble and tried to grab him. But little Thumbling hopped into the cloth, and while the mistress was opening it up and looking for him, he slipped into a crevice in the table. "Ho, ho, mistress," he cried, sticking his head out, and when she tried to strike him, he jumped into the drawer. But eventually, she caught him and chased him out of the house. The little tailor journeyed and came to a great forest where he encountered a band of robbers who intended to steal the king's treasure. When they saw the little tailor, they thought, "A little fellow like that can slip through a keyhole and serve as a picklock for us." "Hey there," cried one. "You giant Goliath, will you come to the treasure chamber with us? You can slip in and throw out the money." Thumbling thought for a while and finally said, "Yes," and went with them to the treasure chamber. He examined the doors above and below to see if there was any crack in them. It wasn't long before he spotted one wide enough to let him in. He was about to enter when one of the two sentries standing before the door noticed him and said to the other, "What an ugly spider is crawling there! I will kill it." "Leave the poor creature alone," said the other. "It has done you no harm." Then Thumbling safely slipped through the crack into the treasure chamber, opened the window beneath which the robbers were waiting, and threw out one thaler after another. While the little tailor was busy at work, he heard the king coming to inspect his treasure chamber and quickly hid himself. The king noticed several solid thalers missing, but couldn't figure out who could have stolen them, as locks and bolts were in good condition, and everything seemed well guarded. He went away again and told the sentries, "Be on watch. Someone is after the money." When Thumbling resumed his work, they heard the money moving and the sound of clink, clink, clink. They rushed in to catch the thief, but the little tailor, hearing them approach, was quicker, jumped into a corner and covered himself with a thaler so nothing could be seen of him, while taunting the sentries and shouting, "Here I am." The sentries ran there, but by the time they arrived, he had already hopped into another corner under a thaler, calling out, "Hey, here I am." The watchman hurried there, but Thumbling had long ago moved to a third corner, calling out, "Hey, here I am." And so he made fools of them, keeping them running around the treasure chamber until they were tired and gave up. He then threw out all the thalers one by one, jumping nimbly onto the last one and flying down with it through the window. The robbers praised him greatly. "You are a valiant hero," they said. "Will you be our captain?" Thumbling, however, declined, saying he wanted to see the world first. They divided the booty, but the little tailor asked for only a kreutzer because he couldn't carry more. He then buckled on his sword again, bid farewell to the robbers, and set off on the road. He worked for some masters, but didn't like it, and finally hired himself as a servant in an inn. The maids, however, couldn't stand him because he saw everything they did secretly without them seeing him, and he reported to the master and mistress what they took from the plates and carried away from the cellar for themselves. So they said, "Wait, we will pay you back," and agreed to play a trick on him. Shortly after, when one of the maids was mowing in the garden and saw Thumbling jumping around and crawling up and down the plants, she quickly mowed him up with the grass, tied it all in a large cloth, and secretly threw it to the cows. Among them was a big black one that swallowed him down without harming him. Down below, however, he didn't like it at all, for it was completely dark and there was no candle burning. When the cow was being milked, he cried out, "Strip, strap, stroll, will the pail soon be full?" But the noise of the milking prevented him from being understood. Later, the master of the house entered the cowshed and said, "That cow shall be slaughtered tomorrow." Thumbling was so frightened that he shouted in a loud voice, "Let me out first, I'm stuck inside her." The master heard it well, but didn't know where the voice came from. "Where are you?" he asked. "In the black one," he answered, but the master didn't understand what that meant and went away. The next morning, the cow was slaughtered. Luckily, Thumbling didn't meet with a single blow during the cutting up and chopping. He ended it up among the sausage meat. When the butcher came and started his work, he cried out with all his might, "Don't chop too deep, don't chop too deep, I'm among it." No one heard him because of the noise of the chopping knife. Now poor Thumbling was in trouble, But trouble sharpens the wits, and he jumped out so skillfully between the blows that none of them touched him, and he escaped unharmed. But he still couldn't get away. There was nothing for it but to let himself be stuffed into a black pudding with bits of bacon. His quarters there were rather cramped, and on top of that, he was hung up in the chimney to be smoked, where time dragged terribly slowly. Finally, in winter, he was taken down again because the black pudding had to be served to a guest. When the hostess was slicing it, he took care not to stretch out his head too far, lest a piece of it be cut off. Finally, he saw his opportunity, cleared a passage for himself, and jumped out. However, the little tailor did not want to stay any longer in a house where he fared so badly, so he immediately set out on his journey again. But his freedom did not last long. In the open country, he met a fox who absent-mindedly snapped him up. "Hey, Mr. Fox," cried the little tailor, "it's me who's stuck in your throat. Set me free again." "You're right," answered the fox. "You're next to nothing to me. If you promise me the chickens in your father's yard, I will let you go." "With all my heart," replied Thumbling. "You shall have all the cocks and hens that I promise you." So the fox let him go and took him home himself. When the father saw his dear son again, he gladly gave the fox all the fowls he had. "For this I also bring you a handsome bit of money," said Thumbling, and gave his father the kreutzer he had earned on his travels. But why did the fox get to eat the poor chickens? "Oh, you fool, surely your father would love his child far more than the chickens in the yard."